but I think we can wait 3-5 minutes if more will join, because I think still people are missing. So I will say 1 minute and we start. Let me know if you cannot hear me or see the presentation well. I'm using a second screen, so that's why I'm looking on another part and not on the camera. Okay, let's start. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here today. And today we will see in the module 2, the 2.2, co-designing and co-creation. And Thursday we will have the second session. So first, a bit of introduction about myself. I'm Massimo Michinelli. I'm associate professor in Elisava, Barcelona School of Design and Engineering. Before I work as a senior resident researcher at Politecnico di Milano and research fellow at MIT University from Melbourne, but based in Barcelona. And my background is in design in Politecnico di Milano, and I also have a doctorate in new media from Aalto University in Finland. So mainly I've been working, my background is also my experiences on design, but also on digital tools for design, and not generally on design, but also for working with communities, for trying to support in their collaboration, their processes, their initiatives, and this by using digital tools. It's also, I think, important to know that now it's 7 years that I work in European projects, but in mainly my 18 years of experience after studying, it's a mix of both practice and research. So with a lot of different roles and perspectives, researcher, consultant, project manager, director of a foundation, now professor. So this is important because a lot of the things that I will show you, also the comments that I will make, it's always a mix of practice and research. This is typical for design, but in any case, also not all designer or design researcher have this focus, so it's very important to always consider this. So Elisava is now faculty of the University of Vic, University of Central Catalonia. Elisava is basically the oldest design school in Spain. It's more than 15 years old. And basically it's now faculty. It's now the first faculty of design and engineering in Spain. And University of Vic is already the 4th best Catalan university and the 6th best Spanish university. And it's a quite recent university, but very quickly improved and grew a lot. Can you see my screen? Because I see my screen in Jitsi. Okay. So in Elisava, we are now in the center in Barcelona, and we have had more than 17,000 students, teachers, and also we work very interdisciplinary in both practice and research between design and engineering. So a bit of recap of Module 2, and especially about 2.2. Okay, you already seen 2.1. In 2.2, we work on co-designing and co-creation. Okay. The idea is to work on collaborative design, participatory design, and community-centered design. And these are important because they will help you in building community, and especially in two directions. First thing is they allow you to create all the initiatives, also the tools that you need, in a way that is very different. Also will probably allow you to overcome a lot of limitation because you're able to understand better what the local context and the local community will need or else will react to the projects. And the other reason is because normally the more you engage also the local community, there are more probabilities that the project will be more long lasting, and it will have a better impact because you're really like developing in a way that the users or the stakeholders are taken in consideration. Most of the time, if we don't design considering users, stakeholders, we are guessing, and we can have a lot of experience, a lot of sensibility, a lot of luck, but asking directly, getting indirectly the people affected is very important for understanding how to create an initiative, lead it, network with everyone, and solving and addressing issues. So today we have an introduction to co-design and an introduction to community-centered design. And Thursday we have co-creation with communities and how to communicate and discuss results with communities. in both days, we are going to work on how to co-design a village hosting initiative. But this is split into 2 parts. Okay, so today we will see a first part, and Thursday you will see much more. So you will see there will also be much more information and also a tool for you that today you will see only a small part. So today is more introductory. We'll try to also to get a bit acquainted, not just with the concepts, but also with the first part of the tool and to see if we can use it. So let's start with Codesign. Let's give it a brief introduction. I mean, why we arrived to Codesign. Broadly, what is Codesign? Because it's not something very narrowly defined, okay? And there are several different approaches that are possible. And then we move to the community-centered part of Codesign. So why do we talk about Codesign? And especially in contexts that are not always necessarily design or the borderline design, or we are not really sure that it's design, but it might be design. Design, as we normally think about it, is the idea of creating something. Creatively create something, or as we more could say, design as form giving. Especially it's giving form to something in 2D, in 3D, if it's an animation, but it's this idea of design as a creative profession. Typical example could be a chair. It's the typical thing. There are so many chairs that most of the time they're just actually created just to promote new concept and idea more than having another chair to the billions already designed. But this is normally the more familiar idea of design, and it's still also the one that even companies, even policymakers have. So it's okay, but actually design has evolved to much more things. Not necessarily replacing this. This is, let's say, traditional way of doing design, of course, has been improved, but there is also another way of doing design that is basically what is called sense-making. So it's not just about form giving, but also creating more sense for the users, for the stakeholders, and also creating more strategic impact. This is something that emerged for several reasons. It has emerged for reasons inside design itself and outside. So, for example, this started in design itself, especially in the 80s, with postmodern design, when designers started to reflect much more on the meaning, on the symbols of design, and now actually could be used beyond the just mere functionality. This is the famous or infamous, if you want, Juicy Salad by Philip Stark. It's infamous because it seems actually it's not very good for making an orange juice, but as Stark himself said when this was released, this is not a functional object, this is a conversation starter. It's a very provocative designer, so the idea was, okay, maybe this is not something that works super well, but if you have at home, at least when you have a dinner or party, people will start talking. So of course that was more of a joke, a provocation, but it's the idea when we start having products and generally designing for much more of the functionality, what could be happening, with the people around it, and also creating more meaning, creating more sense. This is why it's called sense-making. Sense-making is very broad. Another important thing that happened is also the emergence of services, and especially digital technologies and digital services. In post-industrial economies, actually, these are called post-industrial economy because a bigger part of the economy and GDP and wealth of the countries come from services than manufacturing. So there is a lot of part of economies that, for example, now they're based more on services. And this has brought increasingly more design to work with services. And a lot of services we use online, maybe we don't think as services, but they are services. We see the interface, but actually that's what we call the touch point. It's a moment where the users interact with the service. And when we design a service, we design something that is material, the service itself, the flows, the interactions, how people interact through time. Sometimes also the physical thing, what I call the touch point. This is a moment where the user, interact with the service in a tangible way. And it could be a website, it could be an office, a shop, a brochure, an app, Okay, so here more and more what we design is not just the artifact. It's not just, let's say, the 2D, 3D things or whatever we see. It's not just giving shape to an interface, but what is happening when we use an interface, especially with other people. So more and more it's about designing strategic things, strategic initiatives and projects with users. And this is also important because also slowly has improved the way we do design, and also we consider design. An important thing that is emerging is more and more that design should be considered as its own culture. Because sometimes when we use design, of course, the English word is very broad. It's basically anytime we create something or we take decision and we try to change things, and it's fine. But it's not that everything is design. If I move the screen, it's not a design because I wanted to make a change. Okay, and again, as I said before, there is more and more emerging this idea that actually design is a culture, in its own culture that is different from the art, from the engineering, from social science, from art science. It's a third way. Okay, but it's a way that actually reunites practice and research. It's a way that has its own tradition. It's not something that we're inventing now. It's already decades, if not centuries. Okay, but it's important that this typical Western tradition of splitting and dividing whatever is practice and research, the mind and the body in design, we are trying more and more to reunite this. So what is design? And of course, this is actually as brought us more and more to redefine it a bit. If you in typical the basic definition, but Simon is that it's a way of changing something. Try to change something in the direction that we like. Say let's change something in a context in the direction that we want. So this is designing. Simon actually worked more from an engineering viewpoint, but it's broadly something that we can consider. You saw Sarah's presentation, about forecasting and future scenarios. Okay, so what we do design, we always look at the future. Yeah, we can do research on the present, on the past, but when we design, it's always towards the future. It's always changing something towards the future. The other important thing is design. Again, if you want to consider something different from art and also engineering, it's always something that we done as a service for somebody else, on behalf of somebody else. So we design for somebody else, because even if I design something for myself, it's not just my main expressions of emotions or feeling. I am my own customer. I have some requirements, something that I need to follow up. So the designer always has to understand what is the user that has to do it. If you do it as an artist, we don't really have to do it. It's more about our own expression, and then how it is interpreted and adopted is up to the people, but our work will end there. But as an even when we design ourselves, and in general, it's always a service that we do on behalf of the other. So that's why it's important to have consideration of the others. So, and how the idea of working with the users has evolved through the years. Okay, let's see briefly. Because until probably 60s, this was very broad and fuzzy, but not really focused. And generally, companies push ideas, push technologies and products and things on the market, thinking, of course, about the users, but not engaging with the users, not indirectly engaging with the users. Okay, so the first phenomenon that started working with the users is what is called, and is still called, participatory design. Participatory design started in Scandinavia, and it started especially in firm, when especially with new technology emerging, like digital technology, but in general with this democratic idea of redesigning the workspaces with the collaboration of the working force. Like if people need to work in an office, they should have a voice on how the office is structured and how the office works. What are the tools? So anytime we hear the participatory design terms, it means that there's always this very democratic idea, of having the people affected to have an active voice in designing. These start in Scandinavia for the specific context, for the specific social situation, but are expanded. It is a term that is still broadly used, but it has evolved through different steps, also in different places with different meanings. The important thing to understand when we start working with the users that there are many possible ways for doing it. And that not necessarily there is one way or there is one tool, but we need to understand the context and the users, what do they need, especially what they can provide, but also how to organize. So for example, if you see this is already a 30 years old chart, but it's actually very good. It was trying to map the first decades of participatory design. And you see all of these in the chart are different tools, methods, if you want, for engaging with users. And the two axes basically says on the why, who participates with whom and what. So for example, down you see designers participate in users world, and above is user directly participate in design activity. So for example, we can do ethnographic methods when we are in the user world, code development where the users are more part of the active. And here is also positioning activity, positioning the design process, early or late. Typically, we do an ethnographic research at the beginning, not at the end. So these charts, and you will see also another one later, are very useful because they tell us, okay, well, actually, we can customize the way we work. And we have several possibilities of working with users. The next step, historically, was the introduction of user-centered design and what is now also more called human-centered design as well. User-centered design is basically started a bit later in the 80s, and this is completely connected to digital technologies with the introduction of computer. It's more USA as a root, and especially it's more the idea of designing with the user in mind, not with involvement, or at least not necessarily with involvement, but now we have the user in mind, and we do research on the user, we try to design with the user in mind about new technologies. I'm oversimplifying, but generally this was the main also, let's say, in a revolution of user-centered design and human-centered design. What is this image and why it's important? This image is part of an ISO standard. It's a standard about human-centered design. Okay, it's called ergonomics of human-system interaction. This is basically, it's a very simple way of depicting an iterative cycle. So the idea is that we start with identifying design requirements, then we try to understand and specify the context of use, then we try to specify the user and organizational requirements, then we finally produce some design solution, then we evaluate this design solution against the requirements that we found before, and then we decide, is the result good? Is this what we wanted? Okay, then, the process ended. Otherwise, we go back again to identify design requirements. And this is a cycle that can repeat until we reach, our desired solutions. It's very simple, but it's actually very important, because on one side, the first time that we have, human-centered design as an ISO standard, it's finally recognized. And the other thing is also a way for recognizes this way of working in design, that is a process. That is also has its own process, and it can be iterative, and it could be to several steps, and then it's easy to understand that actually it's not something that happen immediately. It's not just a creative act, but needs to go through certain stages, and especially consider the context and the users. It's very simple. It's still an abstract simplification, but it's actually very good. And I think it's very good also myself, I modified this in other contexts. And you will see also later, we'll talk a bit more, but a lot of the work I'm doing in practical research, but also personally, let's say a citizen, has been in the maker movement. So one thing that I did, for example, for a book that I edited and put out some years ago was, let's see how this human-centered design process actually takes place in a fab. So I modified this and thinking, okay, for example, it's the same structure, but we have many more possible flows because we are dealing with digital and physical objects. Digital files, physical objects that are prototyped, ideas, And there is the idea that you can work alone or you can work in a collaborative way. So for example, the development of the idea could be individual, as you see here, or it could be collaboration. And same here. And it could be other steps. So I don't want to go into detail into this. We can see later if you want, but the idea is, again, that you can build broader processes, more custom processes, with this simple idea as the starting point. And again, here we start to see the individual part and the collaborative part in design processes, which is something we will see. Fantastic. So human-centered design, user-centered design being very popular, probably also because of the promotion done by DO. It's one of the main design consultancies in terms of at least celebrity, and has promoted a lot of design thinking. The idea of design thinking comes a lot from them, basically from them, because from Tim Brown, that at least was the CEO that created this group Change by Design. Design thinking is a very simplified process. Okay, it's like when you see something like this. I'm saying this is just a simple model. It's not necessarily always like this, but we can create something like this. Design thinking, a simplification, that is a very simple way of doing the same project, which not just for me, but for many designers, it's too simple. But it had the success of, we need to recognize that of, more and more popularize this idea of design as sense making, as design as something strategic. I will say that I think it's good when we do workshops. The same with canvases, and we'll be using canvases. Sorry. And these are very good for workshops, but they're not the same thing as designing, because designing really takes time. Working with the users is something more complex. So this is just the main distinction I will make. So historically, then from after the 80s of user-centered design, there was a big change in the 90s about how do we design with users, with the idea for user experience and work with experience design. So most of the time when we talk about user experience, we think only about digital tools, but it's much more. Okay, in generally, it's really just about the entire process of acquiring, integrating product, branding, design, usability, function. It's really about the overall experience that a user has. While usability is just the interface, these are a subset of it. This is very important when we consider that. So again, UX, the experience is really about everything. It's about how we experience dealing with all the aspects. And experience, of course, it's important because it's also part of what we need to address when we are designing products, a service, and initiative. Okay, I'm saying this why we move to experience, because when we start with user-centered design, users were very simplified models. So in any case, there were the idea of let's study users, and then we design with the user in mind, centering on the user, and then we bring the designer solution to the user. Then, of course, you can test it, but it's always this idea that we do a research on the users, and then with that, we design something. And then there came a first realization, like, wait a minute. There is something else, it's not just the functionality, usability as functionality. It's not just about pushing buttons and doing the work in a very efficient way, but also how the whole system is experienced. And experience is something, of course, is much more complex to understand. So that's why we start moving to UX design and try to understand more and more the experience. And this actually led to the next step. Already some 15 to 20 years ago, we started to realize that, okay, actually dealing directly, understanding or mapping an experience is actually very complicated. It's not impossible, okay? We can do a lot, but sometimes it's complex, okay? And the idea was, okay, let's start to move to co-designing with users, okay? And this was basically also for joining again with the idea of participatory design. Co-designing is very simple as an idea, okay? You're designing together, okay? The users are taking part in the design process. How is something we'll see. But the idea, and this is a difference with the word of co-creation that is much more used in business and management, is that the relationship in co-design is much more, between formal, informal, professional, professional. And the idea is that we build this relationship. we try to build something together in co-design. In co-creation, it's much more about creating value and capturing value from the users. In co-design, it's more about establishing a connection, a way of working together with the users. So these two charts are actually, probably we can say, from the article that started the idea of co-design, or at least reintroduced it, or at least, gave it light. There are two important things to understand then, okay? So let's see first the chart on the left. The chart on the left, if we want, this is a very simplification of the process of design. At the beginning, we have a lot of ideas, things are very unclear, there are a lot of possibilities, but there is also very chaotic. And the more and more we design and prototype and do the product, we simplify and things are much more clearer. This is the part that is called fuzzy front end of innovation, because it's where it's very difficult to understand where we are going, what to do, how. When you arrive to a prototype, then it's easier to run a prototype to do a product, because it's much simpler. At the beginning, there are too many possibilities, too many also social complexities. So co-design is especially useful in the fuzzy front end of design, especially when we don't know what users will need, how they will react. This is where we should engage them. What is this idea of co-design is especially to engage them in the fuzzy front end. So if you see the image on the right, okay, this again, it's a chart with axis. Here we have on the Y, if it's the design is led by designers or by research, and then we have on the X if the user is considered as a subject or is considered as a partner. Okay, so this way, for example, here you see that participatory design is more the user as a partner, and this is also what we would probably consider co-design, but all of this could be considered co-design. In participatory design, actually, it's much broader than just the Scandinavian route, but it's very important. Design and emotion, this is also what is more probably could be connected to user experience design, or in 2008 when this article was published, was the idea. And user-centered design, you see, is very broad. It goes a bit going also user to the party, but it's mainly user as a subject. Then the idea of critical design is still user as a subject, but it's more led by design. So this is a bit of the difference you see, the split between participatory and user-centered design, and understand that all of these more or less, work with the users in a different way, but not necessarily not necessarily together, or the together is on the left more indirectly, on the right more directly. So here's where we go more to co-design with users. So this is actually expanding more and more. It will be not necessarily a long talk, but we will probably go to very complex topics. Now, one of the frontiers in design, in both practice and research, is expanding human-centered design towards what is called more than human-centered design. I put it just 2 articles. The presentation in PDF is already on the platform, so you can download it. It's because it's very broad. I'm also doing research on this myself, so you will also read more from myself as well. More than human-centered actually goes in a lot of different directions. Simplifying, we could say that at least it means also involving digital technologies, also artificial intelligences, but also working much more in nature. So the idea is that we focus not just on the human, but also all the agents, and that it could be natural or it could be artificial agents. So again, we are expanding, you see, from the idea that we design an artifact to we design many more things, not just artifacts, also services, also interactions, also flows. And we go from the idea that we push products and push artifacts to the user, to then we start considering them, to we start considering also the experience, and then we get them more and more and more engaged in designing. So this is important because also designing is becoming much more complex, but also much more effective, much more impactful, much more interesting, I would say. There's also another couple of experiences that I would like to add to this, because they're connected. They came, let's say, from separate roots, but they are joining, and it's also important. And I think it's very important ideas that are more and more a part of design. One is the idea of DIY design, do-it-yourself design. Well, do-it-yourself is not necessarily something new. I mean, we started probably recognizing it more maybe with punk culture in the 70s, but actually also the first electronics products that they were selling in kit with magazines. But it's something that more started in the 70s, and not just by punk. The typical example in design is Sensemaking, was one of the main famous Italian designers that he worked a lot with industry. But also in the 70s, at a certain point, he did a very provocative project because he was asking himself, what we are designing is really democratic? Is it real for everyone? Probably not. So he made a book with a lot of blueprints, only with basic wooden planks. So that's why also the design is probably not the more refined, but saying, okay, you just get the book, you get the blueprint, and you can make it your own. And this is a way for me to try to make something as more democratic as possible. So again, if you want, this is more connected with Codesign and with Scandinavian design, participatory design, but there were no connection at the time with this. Okay, it's just this idea of getting more the activation of the users. In this case, not in designing, but more in the creation. Technically, we'll probably call it code delivery. Is the part where the product, the service are delivered. But this is something that this idea has always been a bit in the air. In the 90s, where was this idea of experience designs again coming up, there was this famous design company called Druk Design from the Netherlands that created a lot of very conceptual projects. Edited them because they don't design their own, but they get projects from outside, from designer. And this is called the Druk chair. Is basically what you buy the cube, this steel cube, and the hammer, and then it's up to you to give shape to the chair the way you want. Okay, so of course it's not the best chair, but what they were selling you was the experience. It's very simple, but actually this was a reaction to this idea for user experience design and merging an experience and emotions and design. So it's a day that is still being going up. And this is there that's never died, because when we had the big recession, great recession in 2008, 2010, this idea started to, move around again. There was a collective design in Italy that created a book like the Sensemaking, but with a newer version, I call it recession design. But when more and more you understand that also the users were involved in design also, but what are these more or less called star designers? These are not normally the designers that work with users. So it's the idea that it's more and more becoming accepted. And this is also a connection with open source. And open source, it can be in software, in hardware, and design. I will show you some examples. The typical thing that when we think about design in open source, the beginning is Arduino. Arduino is this electronic board. It's done for prototyping, interaction design projects. I don't know if any of you have ever used. The revolution of Arduino is that basically, compared to what was existing before, this was starting in 2005, is that it's much cheaper, it's much simpler, it's designed, and again, that creative people, so designer and artists can use it, not just engineers, and it's open source. So a lot of other products were built, and this was extended a lot. And this created a lot of other things. But again, here you start seeing, for example, the connection with DIY design, because the Arduino you buy is the picture you see on the left, with everything designed, including the packaging and the brand. But it's open source, so anybody can do it. I did it myself. This is Arduino that you can make it in a Fab Lab. The picture on the right. It works. It works well. It works exactly the same. It's not as easy to use. Of course, it's much more work. And I don't know if it will last us longer. I don't know if it's tested, but it works. It's the same. But of course, there is a difference between having DIY and having something that is necessarily made, even if it's open. But the idea is that this more and more got accepted into designing, also as a way for giving space to use for users for co-designing part of what we do, if not everything. because the idea in open source is that you basically you can co-design anything. What is open source? You probably already know it, because now it's quite popular, but I will give a brief introduction. The idea of open source started with software. So with the idea is that, when we work with software, if we have all the information about the software, we can understand how it works, and you can also modify it. Why? Because most of the software works with a code that is understood by the machines, by the computer. It's called machine-readable code. But us, we don't understand anything. We always need to write some code that is called human readable. So it's some code that we can understand, and then it's compiled, it's transformed into some machine readable code. We can do that easily, but we cannot do the opposite. So the idea of open source is that we give away the sources, we give access to the sources, we give access to the documentation of a project. Anybody can join, can modify it, can co-design with us, can replicate it. Maybe the machine readable, the human readable example are difficult to understand. Think about a cake. We need to have the physical cake to eat it, But how can I know how the cake was made? Yes, we can do reverse engineering. I try to do it a lot when I eat some new food. I like to cook, so I try to do this a lot, but it's not always easy. Instead, if we have the recipe, it's much easier. Then we understand how things were done, and we can modify it, and we can collaborate also with whoever is doing anything. So the importance of open source is not just created a lot of cool technologies that we can use, but also that created a much more broader culture of having users working directly with designers in several different approaches. And this is also important because also it's one of the elements that created or gave push to the maker movement. And I'm showing the maker movement for several reasons here. First thing is because it's an example of a movement, of a bottom-up movement related to design, because makers are basically designers. Even they could be engineers, architects, but it's a way of designing. The other thing is also because it's a way how you will do, a creative bottom-up movement now, and I think the villagers could learn from the maker movement, and it could be something similar as a sort of movement. And also because myself, again, I work on it and be part of it, not just doing practice and research, but also being a maker myself and collaborating in the community, again, for more than 15 years. What's important for the maker movement, that sometimes we think it's only about the technology, the 3D printers, but no, it's also about the people creating their own tools, and sharing and modifying existing tools and co-designing with other makers, and also platforms that connect all of them. So this is also why we are developing a platform for villagers, which, this is the first real version. We will need to have several other versions, that we are working on. That with the emergence of platform, the idea that they are called permanent beta. They're always in beta. They always try to improve. There's never a finished product, but it was improved. So consider now we mostly use the platform for training, but there is much more that we are planning for the community of villagers to work together and share information and do co-design. So going back, it's important to understand also just a couple of things about open source. The beginning is actually from what is called free software, that it starts in the 80s. The 80s, where also user-centered design started, is when we started to have digital technologies, so we started trying to understand how to deal with them. The important thing is that free software is much more focused on which freedom I can get by getting access to the code. And it was always at the beginning much more smaller because of how things were done in the 80s. As a software developer, you would have to buy books. There were not so much of software going around and meetings. Then what happened in the 90s is thanks to the internet that Linux emerged. Linux basically was important because this is what the free software was trying to do without achieving, and Linus Torvald was able to do it because of the internet. Because the internet is also what enabled us to do mass collaboration. So it's much easier to do now co-design because we don't have to do just workshops. We don't have to do very limited things where we can scale with the internet. This is an important part of what emerged later as open source, which has a much broader focus. And the focus on open source is also not just on the software, on the artifact, but on building community, on creating ecosystem and processes. Try to get advantage of platforms and the internet to scale collaboration and building communities. So then what happened, that open source have been applied in design in a lot of different examples. One of the first one that was interesting because both hardware, software, and design was open source is this set of devices called Bug Labs. But it doesn't have to be only about technical things, because the important thing is about understanding the concept, and if you want, using tools that can let you collaborate on a scale. So you have open source in fashion design, which is not necessarily high tech. And we have open source in designing things that probably we use every day without considering, like most of the fonts that you will find in Google Fonts, they're open source. And it's typography, it's design. How to know it? Well, you go and when you look at font and you'll see basically what is the license they're using, but most of them, they're not just free to use, you can modify them. They're free to modify. So you can co-design also with other people a new font based on an existing one. And now one of the places where it's much more availability and possibilities of doing open source and also in design, for example, is GitHub. It's a very technical platform, so I'm not suggesting that you use it now, but it's a platform where it's actually much possible to do more complex things with many more people. The platform itself that we're developing, at least all the open source platform, is something that we're developing on GitHub. All the files are there. We keep in tracking of the evolution of the project. And this is the more technical part, but there is another part that I will just briefly introduce, and you will understand later why, that there is always a component of discussing elements of the project in open source. And this is very important when we want to do co-design, having a discussion with all the people affected, user, but also stakeholders. So in GitHub and many open source platforms, well, we have a way for discussing elements, and each element is basically of the project, is a communication, is a discussion. If you want, yes, it's similar to a forum, it's similar to now the comments on Facebook, on Instagram, but the root of this is much older than Facebook and Instagram. But the idea is that in compared to a forum, the first forum, or even the earlier systems, it's not just random discussion, it's focused on a project. It's a way for engaging people in discussing and having a comment, and then another comment, and then comments, working together on a project. This is something that we will take from open source, not using complex platforms, but doing in a simple way. Then we have community-centered design, because what we do with community-centered design is try to do co-design by working with the community, not with just few users, but with the whole community, with all its complexity. So I would like to introduce some concepts, three way of looking at communities. But before, a couple of ideas. The important thing is when we have people working together, co-designing together, it's important to consider it's a social process with all the good and bads of social processes. So we are working with people, so we always have the good and bad of working with people. And it's not just with one person, this scale at community level. Okay, so we really need to understand this. I'm showing you this picture because it's also interesting to see when more people get engaged, it's more messy, but also the projects get better. This is the first year of the development of the Python programming language. What you see above, all the lines above, these are basically contribution of each participant. So you see more and more people interacting, and more people interacting close together. So it's from one person working, to a community of people working. And below in the bottom, what you see is the size and structure of the project. So it grew in size because you see, the bars are bigger, but also you see more colors. So it grew in complexity. There is no way, that one person alone can do all of this, and when you design it together, it's much, much better, faster, not necessarily easier. It's probably easier in terms of results. The difficulty here is in managing and working with the community, the co-part. So again, I would give you some examples from the Milk and Moon because it's based a bit on my experience, but then consider it for village hosting. So first thing is that you can have different kind of communities. Local communities communities that are global, especially when you have networks that are globally, because the making is always a connection of makers between all different continents and different cultures. And then you have projects that, they have some global part and they have some local part. Sometimes they are online, but they're always a bit in a mix. And they put platforms in, as a cross-cutting, because they always help. They go beyond that because there are parts that are also beyond the communities, but it's a way for connecting the local and the global and the projects. So just something to consider. Also, another things is who are makers. So in your case, who are villagers? We are working on trying to define that. One thing that is important to consider that anybody that participates in this movement has different identities, different profiles and backgrounds. In this example, what we tried to do was try to understand, for example, what about the makers that work on social purposes? At least we can create a simple model saying that it's a mix of makers, designers, and social entrepreneurs. Okay, they work with different attitudes, they work in different ways, but this is a way for understanding who could be a maker or how they could be engaged in which role, in which capacity. And then if you want to work to more commercial purposes or other purposes, well, we think about the different identities to be involved. Saying this because I'm sure that among yourself, but in general, the villagers, we have a lot of different profiles. Then when you work with a community, it's like a city. Okay, so it's something that we see on the map, and then we see on the map typically seen as a dot. But then when we look at it in real life, it's much more complex. Okay, there's a lot of complexities. So what do we do normally to navigate that? We build something in between, a map that is for navigating, but also for design. So it's important to have maps. I don't think we have time for this, but I will give you this exercise to do in any case at home then. And the question is, how do you see a community? How do you consider what is a community? Okay. There is a Miro board. The link is on the training. What I will suggest is that each group, I think you already made groups in some module ago. In any case, we can do groups now. I will ask in general to do 5 groups, not more, because otherwise it's going to be too difficult to manage. So everything is set up for 5 groups. You will see in the Miro board. The idea is look for an icon that is your idea of what is a community. Okay, this website, the Gnome project, is where you can download. Most of them are open source, actually, open design icons, and so you can look about it. And then I think it's very good to also inside your group to see how each of you see communities, and most likely will be in different ways. So this is something that I think in the next days you should do. I see when we have time later, but I would like to explain more, and then we have another big exercise. So as I said before, I think there are at least 3, probably more, but I'll see what will show 3 ways of considering a community. First is as different people, as a set of different people. Also a set of different levels of participation, and then as a network of different people, different ways of participation. Okay. Community is different people. So this is an example of a project years ago. It's Personas is one of the simplest tools in user-centered design. Again, if you want a simplification of having profiles of user, but it's already a way for discussing, understanding what are the different people. This I did years ago when I was building a Fab Lab, and this was very useful because we were able also with the people launching the Fab Lab to understand who were the users that could be part of the Fab Lab, and also to understand actually that we needed to create more activities because, for example, among the user, there were also the idea of having the kids and then also the grandparents, and then having different kind of activities. What I did back then is also make a structure of all the activities and how they're connected between each other, like a network of activities. We don't need to go into depth here, but just to understand, that when you have different people, then each of them, they will do something different or in a different way. So try to understand how they go together and, and work together on this. So again, it's not just the different kind of people, also different kind of activities and how they work together. Different levels of participation. This is very important. It's probably more theoretical, but I think it gives very simple but very powerful tools and concepts for working with communities, especially with participation. This ladder came from the end of the 60s by Einstein. It's called the ladder of citizen participation. It's a way of classifying participation of citizens in public projects. And what it says at the beginning, no, the lower levels, it's not participation. Okay, there is some connection, but it's not participation. The more we go up, the more there is participation. Okay, and then the last one is citizen control. So this was done for criticizing most of the public participation in the 60s to say, hey, wait a minute, not everything is participation. What I think is interesting here is to consider there are different possible ways or having different kind of people and different kind of activities participating. So consider not just as a critic, but as a tool for how you do people with the community. There is another concept that seems quite complex, but it's very simple. It's the idea of that when you work in a community, you start at the beginning in the periphery. You know, newcomers start at the periphery. And the more and more you engage, you interact, you collaborate, you learn, the more and more you get to the center of the community. The center is where you have the people that have been in the community for more time, the people have been working for more. So the more healthy communities of practice, this is where the concept started for this, like that they work in this way. You know, there is possibility for getting to the center to working and learning much more. So again, not necessarily when people arrive, they could have the full participation. It could be here, or this could be the people that, you know, manage most of the community. You will see also next lecture on Thursday more about this, but also later. Another important concept, and this is again is very theoretical, but it's very important, is what is called sticky information. This was elaborated by Eric von Ippel, which is probably the main or one of the more famous researchers working in co-creating with users in business. Is the idea that a lot of the time, most of the times, when we need to design something, the information about what to design, how to design, is something that is so much connected to the context that is sticky, that is very costly to acquire, transfer, and use in another place. So it's sticky. So the idea then to transfer this information, by professional is that we need also to have the users involved. This is a way, for example, for managing a co-design process. My main idea here, I think, is considered that when you need to decide who participated now, always ask yourself, do they have the sticky information or not? Who has the best information that is necessary in any time, And this is probably one of the criteria that I would suggest you to consider to understand who should participate and how. So, for example, this table is a simple tool that I got from Urbanism, from a branch of European approach that is called action planning. And it's a way, for example, of using this idea of ladder and stickiness of information with a design process. We will see more next Thursday. But just to give you an idea, this is a project I did some years ago, and you see several steps here, several phases on the X, and on the Y you see different level of participation, from no participation on the top to full participation below. So again, what we did here is design, the first people that created the project, we started on our own, but then more and more we open it to the communities. And of course, you can create a different approach, different steps. So it's actually possible to, give shape to the process of co-designing with people. And we will see this on Thursday. Then when we see the community as a network, and this is more something they can do research, but it's just to give you an idea, to give you a picture of what is a community. So for example, 10 years ago, I mapped the Italian community of makers. Back then, we used to meet on Facebook. There was a Facebook group. So this is the image you get. This is the connection between the friends on this group. So you see there is a big core group, but also there is, community around it. there are some users around it that are not so much connected. What is this? Where we have seen this? Okay, this is the same structure. This is the real one. In fact, it's very difficult to do this kind of analysis. Facebook and data is very sensitive. So after this, I decided I will never do again research with Facebook. But you will see much newer maps. So again, then when we are here and we see the center, we see different colors. So you see each circle, it's a user. And the bigger it is, it means the more friends it has. And the different color, it means that it's a different groups. So what we have here, we have different cities. It was easy to see different cities. In the case of Milan, there was a difference between the university and the practitioners. What was interesting that the biggest node you see here at the center, the big green node, this is actually a company. This is a company that then to each user told them, hey, you can join a community because Sensemaker is not just a service. It's not just something that we give you in exchange for money. You can get part of the community. And so more and more people connected and got part of the community thanks to them. And I think this is a concept that's very interesting also for village hosting, because any way you start it is also the idea that all the users and stakeholders that get in contact with your initiative is there's not just user. You can tell them, okay, you can get on board and be part of the community. But this was the map of who's friend with whom in the community. I did also another map, which is who talked to whom, who collaborated, who worked in the community. Now, the problem is that only 21% of the community participated actually in the discussion, and only 3 of them actually. I'm one of the 3. So what happened is then the 3 of us got very busy with life, work, and everything. So then the Facebook group went down. It's not necessarily a big deal because the Italian Maker community grew and grew somewhere else, but it's very important when you understand a community, when you work with it, understanding how to keep working with it. Try also to not to have very few people doing a lot of the work and that leaving because they don't have time. This is important when connecting with a community. These are the analysis. This analysis that I did on GitHub, and it's good because you can see, well, in green the people that are working, and in red the people that are not working, but they're part of the community. So what you see again, very few ones are working. Some of them they're interacting. There is a big part here. You see that they don't have any connection. This is because they're just looking at. So you might also have people that are looking, they're seeing what's happening, but they're not doing anything specific. In any case, that only few ones, the green ones you see here, that are actually doing work. But how is something that we can see. But if you track also through time, you can see also how the collaboration can go through time. This is the same project. It's a project I was part of. Improve it through time. How the collaboration went up through time. You can see at the beginning was only one person working, and the more and more collaboration emerged. The analysis of Facebook I show you now. Then I've been doing it on Twitter, which is much better, much easier and simpler and not sensitive data. When I did the first analysis, I saw that actually the maker community was divided into 2 polarities. This is very important because it's actually not one community, but 2 communities. That they are at risk of fighting and being separated. This is again something you might find. It's important to consider. And the more and more you can go down and see the subgroups and how people connect. And then you can see on one side on the right, there are clear colors, and on the left, actually much more mixed. On the left are Fab Labs, on the right are makerspaces and makerspaces. What's important to understand here that the different colors, because here people work together more on projects, and now it's much more dense community than the other ones. So we can see, for example, how the number of friends that we have in the community. So you see on the left, on Fab Labs, they have more. Users tend to have more. We can see who are the people that are connecting the different parts of the network. And if you see only few of them, keep the community together. Again, you don't want to have these people leave. You don't want to have these people in conflict, because otherwise the community will explode into different parts. We can also measure what is called typically the trust in a community with this measure called eigenvector. And then you see on the left is basically totally on the left. So the Fab Lab community has much more of this trust. The PageRank, which is the algorithm of Google, okay, it's more iterative version. So here you can define to very few nodes. You see it's on the other side, but actually it's very few of them. So again, this is a way for seeing also the status of trust, of friendship in a community. This is with more quantitative way, but this is possible. I did this 5 years later. Okay, so you see more parts emerging. There are still 2 different sides and still with different level of communities, more and more. So there is an evolution, and they're not as far apart, as 5 years ago, but still, there is much work to do in this kind of things. So communities, they have this messy shapes, they have this messy nature, fuzzy nature. It's important because it's actually what happens, compared to ideal model. This is what happens in real life. So again, to recap, consider resolve communities are different peoples with different activities. They can participate in different level of participation, so also in different ways and different times. And it's always people interacting, so it could be messy. We need to understand the social dynamics. They could be much more, approaches, but this is the basics. So the main activity, that we should start now and then do tomorrow a bit is also how can we co-design Village initiative. So the main exercise we're doing today and Thursday, so this week, is try to start in a simple way. I show you a very complex way so far, but just to explain a bit of the main concepts. But I will do in a simple way. And we will co-design a Village initiative. Okay, and we design some tools for you for that. We have canvases. Again, we're doing more workshop. So again, it's more about understanding the basics. You can use also later, but remember that designing takes much more than canvases, but you can use this for helping in the process. So we create a canvas for starting first from the village. Okay, understanding what are all the different dimensions of your locality and how your initiative, could, work with, or something that is missing and try to, improve it. And you have on culture and society, production and agriculture, services and infrastructure, flora and fauna, and geomorphology and climate. Why? Because a lot of time when we work as villagers, we strive so hard, to improve localities. Now I live in a big city, I'm also from a small town myself. But sometimes the main problem is about services infrastructure. We are missing that. Okay. Or, a specific geomorphology climate will impact it both in a positive and in a negative way what we are doing. Okay. So this is something that, we should consider, So starting point is look at the positive and negative aspects of each dimension of your locality. And if we start with village, then we move to hosting. Okay. And so we thought, okay, there are a lot of possible aspects that you can consider, but to simplify things, it's something that we can do. You can start from activities, then the partners, external partners, but that are necessary for what you do, the guests, we are hosting. So you also need to focus on them. Okay, let's not call them users now, but guests is a bit more than users, because also maybe they are part of the community or they should be part of the community. So that's important to consider. Then we have land and buildings. These are important because different kind of land, different kind of buildings you have access to will lead to different kind of village hosting. The business side, which means business model, but also cost, revenue, what's happening, what is there that is important to consider. And lastly, the knowledge. What are important knowledge, skills, resources that we need for doing that? It's not necessarily something but maybe, okay, we need something about a specific type of knowledge, I don't know, agriculture, and then we look for people, we look for books, we look for online resources, but to understand what is important for the kind of village hosting initiative we want to do. So these two simple canvases are for starting discussing this, but the way we're going to do it, and also we show you, it's a mirror, and it's also by documenting and the discussion about that. These two are part of a toolbox that we will show you on Thursday, the full one. Okay, for now it's a surprise because there are many more things. So I don't want to throw a lot of things on the first day. But also the idea is that all of these are there for papers. So also when you will see the toolbox, you will be able also to print them. But I want that for now you try to exercise a bit on mirror because it's good to work online, because I want to work on group, because this is where we see the co-part. If you work alone, we'll not be able to see it. So how to document the discussion on this? So we have created another canvas that is for the discussion. And you see, this is basically like a discussion on GitHub, but it could be in any online discussion from one, and it follows, a thread. We do this because basically anytime you work with one canvas, you can add it by side. Do you need to do more discussion? You do more and more and more. Now, Miro would suggest you to do only one, okay? But start working with that, okay? So the village and the hosting, and not just documenting this here, but decide how to fill it, what to write it here following the discussion. Then in the presentation, you also have bibliography. If later you want to see more, you can always ask me if you have anything. And this is it in terms of the presentation. Let's move to Miro. So I think you already done some activities on Miro, so you should be able to log in and everything. This is the important part. So one important thing is try not to move these canvases, because I think some of them are already moved. So if they're locked, they should be locked. Please, that's important, because otherwise it's never going to work anything on Miro. This is important. So consider these as normal canvases. So how you will work with this? We add post-its on top. So my suggestion is use these groups. I mean, this is something that we found in a previous class. Yes, let me put the link in chat there too. And Daniel, would you like to talk and ask something? Okay, only the link. Okay, so if you have different groups, let's talk, but it's very simple. But the idea again is just focus on this and just add a post-it as you will do in a normal paper version. And you can write a lot of text. And you can customize, and since it's digital, it's not that important, the size. Again, think about the discussion. Of course, this is, if you want, it's not the same as, talking together at a table, but if you need to talk to multiple people, this is a very important concept. Probably I didn't stress it enough before. If you work only a few people, yes, you can use Canvas in a workshop. That's why a lot of Codesign is a workshop. But if you need to work with a community, you need to work with a lot of people. which probably they're not together at the same time. So document all the discussion. That's why I'm saying use always a canvas for documenting all the discussion. So ideally you could add more and more of the discussion canvases, but I would say let's just do one as an exercise, okay, and see how it goes. And why this is important? Because, for example, consider that I'm also a member of the community, but I'm not participating now. And then on Thursday, I will join and see this. I will already see the discussion that has been going on before. And so I can keep comment on that. This is the same way when we work on GitHub. This is an part in GitHub that is called issues. This is what I showed before. These actually are issues that are solved. But you see, you have all the thread of communication, and anybody that can join later can understand what's going on. So the idea of having the discussion canvas is that they don't necessarily do something very complex, but just to try this idea of discussing with the post-it and documentation.
Excuse me, how could I get to my group?
So I don't know which groups you have formed. I saw in a previous lecture there was this structure of the groups.
I was asking in which way I could join my group. I understood the structure. But where is the joining the group button?
You don't need to do anything. You just go, if you go mirror, there is the link in the chat. Then if you're part of group 2, you go to this part of group 2 and you work.
Yes, I am actually, I have already a mirror, but I can't discuss with my group because we don't have a room established.
Yes, we don't need to have the room. Actually, it was the structure we used because the idea is to discuss with the post-it. And I'm telling you, I know that it's not as easy as staying on the table and working together and doing a call, but because the idea is, this is a way when you need to have documentation and discussion also for the overall community. Then, of course, you can organize call, you can talk about it, it's not a problem. What I think it's important here, not necessarily on Thursday that when we look at it, we see the quality of everything, if it's perfect or not, but we see about this idea of documenting also the discussion together. Then on Thursday, you will also see the full toolkit, the full toolbox. So you will see also the full thing about organizing Codesign, but we wanted to start with something simpler. Where we can find post-it papers in Miro. So post-it papers are here on the bar on the left. It's called sticky note. And you can choose the color and you add it where you need to add it. You change the size and write the text. In my case, then I can also delete it. So also this, I can delete it. So another important thing is also where to begin from, where to start, and because otherwise, which kind of village just initiative? So normally in open source is basically we talk about the founder who started the discussion, So basically it's up to you in each group. Some of you will start and saying, okay, which kind of village just initiative it's about. So my suggestion in the discussion, the first one will start. The idea was also right here in the circle your name. So for example, here I can add my name. And here, for example, I add a post-it. That was the first idea I had as a Villagers initiative with local production. It's in the Alps, so we cannot do a lot of things, but we can do something else. So maybe we have a lot of woods. Maybe we cannot grow tomatoes, but at least a lot of other things can be done locally. And depending on this, there could be much more of any things we do. So then what happens? Somebody else then join, write the name, add another post-it, ask maybe another question. And so on. So for example, I see Yanis, you're already starting post-it there. So I suggest you to, in the first comment, define which kind of specific village hosting initiative you are talking to. Just one post-it about it. Ivana, how can we write the name? You see on the left bar, just above the sticky notes, you have the text tool. You click where you want to have the name, and then you write the name. I think Daniel wanted to ask a question, please. Or Dragana, you had some issues with Miro. We can talk about it if you have any question. It's not the same as working in the same space, but since we are in a very different, lot of places far away, that's how we want to use it. Yes, Daniel, I saw your hand is raised. I don't know if it's still from before. Do you have any other question? Okay, see, Ivana, it's work for you. Okay, you don't see that. Okay. So one thing that you may experience, you see, might be messy, but yes, this is also what happens when you work with more people and design with more. That's why one important thing is to organize the whole process, but this is what we're going to see on Thursday. So don't worry if it's complex in terms of interactions. We are trying to do something we are normally used to do in the same physical place, but online. But it's an idea, to begin approaching this idea and then work it later. One thing that I probably is missing that I left in another board was try to do also the icon exercise about defining a community. I will add other boards here so that you can also do that.
Milyen 20 perc múlva indulunk.
Hova? Jó, online sulizok. Online.
Yes, you should always be on the same project in the same group. That's why I was saying that the first one to start in the discussion should define where is the place. So also in the 4 boards below is where I suggest you to add the icons from the known project. So for example, the way I see the community is more as a network of interactions. Oh, here are a lot of different icons that they show it in a different way. So they all have different ways of looking at this. So I might like one more than another. Let's say that I think the community is more like a pizza. Why? I don't know. It's always an example that I make. And then I can choose which one is actually makes more sense. So for example, this for me makes more sense as a community. If you want, as these two, but it's not clear. You see, this is also community. Because it seems there are different people on the same part, on the same slice of pizza. But otherwise, if I go on this, so I have to log in to download. Click to get this icon. I do basic download, so it's zero. Cost is zero because it's use Creative Commons. It's open source. I just need to credit the author. I download, for example, the PNG. Okay. See if I can add it like this. Yes. And this, for example, you see I added my icon. So I suggest please do this as an exercise too this week. So Thursday we will have a look. So each of you just choose one icon about the community and add it to your group canvas. Because this is also, in the end, simple, but it's a very good discussion about what is a community. Do you have any other question, comments, or I'll leave you to Miro and we see you on Thursday?
I have a question.
Yes.
Actually, before we are starting all these activities, could you just explain how does it works and how we should proceed? Because already third time in a line, we are just doing something, for my understanding, different what is expected. But it's only because we have no real instructions what to do. Because finally we have no technical problems as it was before. But still, no, we are putting each our own project or something else, I don't know, and we don't discuss anything because nobody really have understood the idea.
This is because the idea is that each module it's autonomous in the way the exercise is done. So in my case, we would like you to work in group because otherwise there is no collaborative part, there is no co. But of course, since each of you has a different village of initiative, it's difficult now to take only one and work on now. Since these are more simple exercise, but the idea is that you get all these tools. And again, then tomorrow we're going to upload the full toolbox, but on Thursday we will see also the other tools. And this is something that you can also use on your own or for your own initiative. And then for this kind of tool, you can always reach to me to talk about it.
Thank you for answer.
Because otherwise we should have had only people on very few projects, but we wanted to have as many more projects as possible, so then it's easier for anyone. So I see the group 5 is already discussing it a lot. Yeah, and you see you can add a lot on your part. Of course, you can do this and you can keep going on. This idea was structured in chronologically, but you can also do by your only put all of your content there. Of course, consider that if you do chronologically, it's easier to read. Up to you. This is the norm. In any case, all canvases are used in a different way. Before, I see they just did a test with Post-it. Group 3 is working it. Try to fix this. Okay, I think that now we can stop this streaming. We stop the lecture, and we will see you on Thursday.